Can I stack them on my head? Welcome back to my channel. I feel crazy. I had a really long day at work and I don't know what I'm doing, but I finished the Dark Artifices after 2 freaking years, so we're gonna talk about it. The Dark Artifices, Cassandra Clare, another Shadowhunter series. These books are so freaking massive. I'm like trying to hold them all up and it's like, I do not lift weights enough to be able to do this. The Dark Artifices, if you have not heard of this series, it is, like I said, a Shadowhunter series. If you don't know what the Shadowhunter books are by this point, like I don't know how to help you, but basically angels, demons, warrior race that have magical tattoos that help them fight demons. Anyways, the Dark Artifices is the, I don't even know what series to call it, like the 4th series? I don't know. Basically there was the Mortal Instruments, then there was the prequel series, and then Mortal Instruments got elongated, kind of a sequel, kind of the same thing, and then this is the one that follows that. So if you remember Clary and Jace from the original trilogy, they are adults in this series, and the series primarily focuses on Emma Carstairs and Julian Blackthorne and their stories. As I said, it took me 2 years to read these. They're pretty thick, okay? Like, girl got some curves, but like, that's no excuse because I read the Throne of Glass series in like a month, so. Basically, if you can't tell from the over 24 months it took me to read this series, I had a real hard time getting into it. And I want to talk about it because I'm a big Cassandra Clare fan. I love the Mortal Instruments, and the Infernal Devices is bae. Like, there is no love triangle that is more beautiful than that. I want to talk about this series because I read it. I sound insane. Pull yourself together. But mostly because a lot of people said this is her best work. So Cassandra Clare has faced a lot of in recent years, particularly for the incest-ish in her books. Also, apparently she bullied people online. Again, allegedly. I have no proof of that. I don't know. Point being, she's faced a lot of criticism and people don't like her earlier books because they're quite juvenile. Anyway, so people often point to this series and they say, don't judge it based on the Mortal Instruments, like you gotta read the Infernal Devices. She's grown so much, it's her best work, she's so much better. Sorry, the Dark Artifices, not the Infernal Devices. So I went into this thinking like, it's gonna be everything I love about the Mortal Instruments, but better. But actually, I think that this is her worst series. Scandalous. So I'm gonna tell you why eventually when I stop rambling. This review is going to contain spoilers and my brain is tired and fried, so it's going to be very disorganized. I'm just gonna start blurting out things about the series in no particular order. So yeah, spoilers, and if you haven't read it, you probably won't have any idea what I'm talking about because I'm not gonna explain it very well. Let's talk about the things that I liked first. As always, I love this world. I think Cassandra Clare has done a really amazing job of developing a whole world. I really feel insane right now. Her world building is very well developed, which obviously it would be after writing 10 books. I don't know how many she's written. Probably like 15. I don't know, with short stories. She's written a lot in this world, so clearly it's well developed, which I like. Julian Blackthorne, good character, quite complex. I really like his kind of silver-tongued lying ways, but heart of gold. Also his curls, we love them. I stan. Emma Carstairs, great, but she's basically Jace with less snark, so been there, done that. Kit and Ty, yes. Everything about that, yes. The ending broke me, like, why? You're trying to tell me that I made it through this gigantic piece of work waiting for them to be together and then they just go their separate ways? Why you gotta break me like this? It's really refreshing to see Autistic Rep. I also am by no means an expert, so I have no idea like how the rep would feel from somebody that has that experience. I'm not gonna say like he's a great representation because I really don't know, but as somebody that does not have that experience, it was refreshing to read and I thought well done from what I understand. Another thing I really liked was the ending with Magnus and Alec's wedding. Oh my god, it was so beautiful. I did not cry, but I was moved almost to tears when Alec was talking about how he doesn't want to be remembered as being the consul or a great warrior or whatever. He wants to be remembered as the man who loved somebody so much he changed the world for him. I was just like, so beautiful. Especially since in the Shadowhunter world, they are not very accepting of queer people. And me, having grown up in the church, was not very well accepted by most people around me when I came out. So it rang quite close to home, I suppose. The wedding scene, beautiful. Mwah, we love it. Now I want to talk about the overall reason why I don't like this series. It's not because of the writing or the characters or anything like that. I like Cassandra Clare's writing, I like her worlds, and I like her characters on the whole, but said, first of all, some pacing issues. This book is nearly 900 pages long. It does not need to be, but that's a minor issue. My main issue with the series, the main reason I don't like it, is because it doesn't have a strong antagonist. Hear me out. Without a strong antagonist, there wasn't enough tension in both the plot and also like thematic tension to really, for me, feel like the story had any emotional weight. And I think that's directly because it didn't have a strong villain. A story doesn't necessarily need one main evil villain to be successful, but I think that if you're going to go the route of multiple small villains, you have to do it in a far more complex and nuanced way than we really saw in this series. The Dark Artifices has Malcolm, Annabelle, the Unseelie King, Sebastian, sort of, Horace, many villains that play a small role in the plot. Like I said, that's not an issue in and of itself, but if you don't have one strong antagonist upon which to kind of fuel your protagonist or to pin your themes on, you have to write it in a way that's much more subtle, kind of like Game of Thrones, for example. When you're writing a story, you have to in some way grapple with the question of good and evil, particularly if you're writing a coming-of-age story or a fantasy story, and there are kind of two ways you can do that. You can define it in the objective sense, so two opposing forces, or the subjective sense, where it's much more individualistic. If you're going to do it in the subjective sense, the characters need to be exceedingly complex. They need to be both good and evil, and the reader from that can tell that good and evil kind of just depends on whose perspective you're looking through. Think Game of Thrones, like I mentioned. At the beginning, you think that the Starks are good and the Lannisters are evil, but as the story develops and you spend more time in each group's head, you realize that actually everyone has their own motivations and nobody's are entirely pure. Everybody has both good and evil, and it just depends on who you are. This is the way to tell a story without a strong antagonist, because everybody is in some sense an antagonist. As a reader, you don't necessarily know who to trust, and the characters themselves are wrestling through what it means to be a good person and what it means if they ultimately conclude that they're not a good person. However, my problem with The Dark Artifices is that it doesn't do this. It sets up the story to be this kind of subjective view of good and evil, where there is no strong antagonist. There's no this force is truly evil, this force is truly good. It brings those sort of moralistic questions very much into the political factions of the world, but then actually simplifies the question by making the characters themselves overly confident in their beliefs. Cassandra Clare in this series makes it very clear to the reader who's good and who's evil, who's racist, who's not, who's a transphobe, who's not, so that there's no real moral complexity left for the reader to wrestle through, or even for the characters to wrestle through. All of the villains in this series are evil. That's made clear to us, and yet they're not a strong enough evil character to represent that kind of objective force that must be overturned. In contrast, the good characters like Julian and Emma, Christina, Mark, all of our main characters, the good guys, are inherently good. They might make mistakes and they do have human flaws, but they don't actually have to struggle through the question of their own moral inadequacies. This ends up making, actually, in my opinion, a very boring story that doesn't really hold any emotional weight. In contrast, let's take a look at The Mortal Instruments, which was Cassandra Clare's first series. The Mortal Instruments uses the classic objective good and evil single antagonist format to tell its story. Valentine is the sole scary villain. Everybody is afraid of him. He represents true evil in the sense that he has aligned himself with demons, the objectively, irredeemably evil force, in order to take over the world for power. Yet despite the fact that Cassandra Clare sets up a very objective view of good and evil, the characters themselves are much more subjective about it. While Valentine's evil is objectively evil, he is subjectivized through his love for his children, no matter how twisted and effed up it is. Even though he's cruel and ultimately kills one of his children, I think you can tell through his interactions with them and the true remorse he shows upon Jace's death that he does have some kind of love for them and for Jocelyn, his wife, even though it's effed up. Like, I'm not saying he's good at loving people, but there's kind of like, there's a human element to him which subjectivizes his symbolic, objective, evil state. This is further developed by the fact that Jace also loves Valentine. Again, it's twisted and Jace has conflict about it because he knows that his father is not good, but he does have an undeniable tie to him. Valentine himself also, while being terrible, also has a deep-rooted belief that he's doing the right thing. That despite the fact that he's using terrible cruelty and evil ends, he's doing it for the objectively good force. paradoxically and ironically. This gives the story its complexity. Cassandra Clare defines morality in simple terms of good and evil, angel, demon, one evil antagonist that all of the good guys are afraid of, and yet the story is given its complexity because the characters themselves aren't sure what that means. The stakes are much higher than in the Dark Artifices because the objective realities of good and evil that Cassandra Clare has created are grounded in the reality of the human experience, where nothing is simple and what is truly evil or good is not always clear. Despite the fact that we know that Valentine is the evil villain, the reader has to wrestle through his own moral question of what he's willing to sacrifice for his ends, and the reader feels the tension of Jason Clary's potential draw to the dark side because both of them have very complex feelings towards their father, who they feel they should love and sometimes do love despite how twisted he is. In contrast, the Dark Artifices, the stakes are lowered because good and evil are defined in complex terms, yet the characters themselves have a very simple understanding of it. No one questions their values, and everyone can determine right from wrong easily. There is nothing redeemable in any of the villains, and there is nothing irredeemable in any of the heroes. And so when the villains are defeated, there's no real emotional impact to their defeat. Likewise, when the protagonists succeed, their journey to success doesn't hold emotional weight because they didn't have to learn anything new about themselves to get there. And as a reader, we never have to fear that they're going to choose wrongly. Compare Julian and Jace, for example, and you can see what I'm talking about. Unlike Julian, who will only ever take power or lose power for the sake of helping his family, Jace, in contrast, is much more drawn to the dark side, and so as a reader, we're never fully confident in his ability to make the right decision. Julian puts the needs of others always before himself. Jace wants to put the needs of others first, but it's coupled with a very deep desire he has to be loved in return, and so that can often manifest in selfish grabs for power or grabs for power done out of fear. Ultimately, his motives are not totally wrong. He wants to be loved and he doesn't want to be afraid, but he is willing to go to darker lengths to achieve those goals because they're more selfish than Julian's goals. Because the object of Jace's love is evil, Jace has to wrestle through the meaning of good and evil on a much deeper level. In the Dark Artifices, evil is defined in much more human terms, things like racism, transphobia, political power, which again can be a good thing, and these are definitely questions that people need to wrestle through. Yet the problem is, in the Dark Artifices, nobody is wrestling through these questions. In the Mortal Instruments, we have a much more simplistic definition of good and evil, and yet the characters are confronted with it on a much deeper level. In the Dark Artifices, we have a much more complex understanding of good and evil, and yet the characters are already given the right answer. I'm not saying that she needed to write a story in which we can sympathize with the racism of the cohort, but I think that their complete lack of humanization makes the story feel less real and less weighty. But everyone is a product of their environment and their upbringing, and so these are real questions that people have to wrestle through as they grow and are presented with new ideas that confront their understanding of the world. In the Dark Artifices, we don't see this. We have it made very clear that anybody who is not accepting of diversity in any form is a terrible human being. I do think that's a terrible trait, and I'm glad that the author wants to show that that is very wrong to feel that way. But I think that in order for this message to come across, the nuance of life has been removed from the story, and therefore the story does not hold emotional weight. As well, everybody that is on opposing sides are very distant from each other, so you don't have characters being confronted with antagonism within their own safe family context. This also creates a kind of moral simplicity to the story. Basically, to sum it all up, I think that the themes of the story are presented more like propaganda than explorations of moral questions that cause the reader to wrestle through their own values. I know that's a harsh criticism and many people love this series, but like I said, I do think that it's not bad. It's just the reason that I don't like this as much as her other works is because personally I feel like it completely lacks the subtlety of her earlier books and gives away the answers to the questions presented far too easily. That is all I have for this book talk slash review slash word vomit about The Dark Artifices by Cassandra Clare. I hope you enjoyed this video. I'm sorry for rambling so much. If you enjoyed, make sure you give this video a like and do leave a comment below with your thoughts about this series and subscribe to my channel if you haven't. If you would like to support this channel in any way, you can find a link to my Buy Me a Coffee page below where you can donate any amount from, I think $3 is the minimum up, and it helps me to get my music on streaming platforms like Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, that kind of stuff. Not sure if you know, but it does cost money, so when a lot of you ask why certain songs aren't up there, it's because I'm a broke bitch and can't afford it. So if you do want to help support this channel or help support my music or make it more accessible to you, then please do head to Buy Me a Coffee and support this channel. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in the next video.